Hi, I'm Todd Jones, host of the podcast Pressbox Access. Here's a clip from my interview with Liz Clarke. Liz explains how she earned the trust and respect of one of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time, Dale Earnhardt. Liz, was there a moment early in your career where that helped you, that you recall an anecdote with a particular athlete or a coach or somebody that was set up as one thing and then you saw right through it?
I'm sorry. I was thinking, what am I going to say? And then something came to me. And again, you can tell I'm long-winded, so forgive me in advance. You know, it actually, now that I think about it, or that you plant the seed, I think that is really why I ended up getting along so well with Dale Earnhardt, the guy, you know, the dad, the late Dale Earnhardt.
Right.
So I didn't know. I mean, NASCAR was among the things I didn't really know about when I went to the Charlotte Observer, but it was a huge sport in the South, a huge sport. It was starting to become a huge national sport.
Yeah, this is the early 1990s when it was really starting to branch out.
Oh, yeah. And it was really the sport in Charlotte because almost all the race teams were based in and around Charlotte. So there were 2 huge races in Charlotte every year. It took almost the whole Observer sports staff to cover them. It was such a big deal. I mean, we had a full-time racing writer. We had columnists who could write racing. But it took, like, everybody. So in these lulls, I got sent out to the racetrack.
Now, wait a minute. I hear that the first time you went to a practice, you wore a dress, and you were not welcomed because of that.
Yeah, among the many things. I thought.
Now, wait a minute. Why was that? Why did they frown upon that?
There's a rule in the garage. You know, if you're working in the garage, not a fan, but if you have a credential to work in the garage back in the day, there weren't many rules, but you had to wear closed-toed shoes, like no sandals, and, you know, long pants. Or, you know, this had to do, I think, with fire. You know, not like, ooh, females are too sexy that cars are going to wreck or anything like that. It was like ostensibly a safety thing. You know,
I got you. Right.
Yeah. Now, I mean, well, I won't even go down that road. But yeah, so I thought races were on dirt, and you know, I happened to wear a dress. But anyway, back to Earnhardt and the I guess what worked in my favor. That is the opposite of awe. You know, he was the ultimate badass, and just, you know, drove the black car, the black 3. He was mirrored sunglasses, you know, impenetrable.
The Intimidator.
Persona. Intimidator, yeah. Exactly. Right. And he was known among reporters as a giant pain in the ass. You know, very surly and moody, and you know, people kind of tippy-toed around him, and he. All that's true, but that was not truly who he was. I came to learn. So one of my first assignments was do a long profile of Dale Earnhardt. And this was preceded by negotiating, like, how much time can I get around Dale Earnhardt? And so, stunningly, really not because of me, the place of the Charlotte Observer, I was allowed to shadow him for a whole day. It actually ended up being almost a whole weekend because there were other events. But my main meeting, when I got to know him, was this day that I spent with him, although I had dealt with him a little bit at the track and seen how he treated other people, and people kind of gave him a wide berth, in other words. So I was supposed to meet him at his race shop, not the one that he raced for, but his personal one where his kids have their race cars. And Dale Jr. being one of them. He was quite young at the time. At 7:30 one morning, and we were going to go to North Wilkesboro. He immediately offered me a Sundrop soda and a chicken biscuit, you know, for breakfast, because we were going to have this long day.
Nice.
And, yeah, how great is that? And we ended up, like, jumping in his pickup truck and heading out for the drive up to North Wilkesboro, which is like 90 minutes. Most people maybe a bit less for him.
So it's you and Earnhardt in the cabin of his truck.
Well, there was his PR guy was in the back, and there was a back seat. But
so how did he drive on a regular road?
Oh, just well, I mean, not ridiculous, but not like a normal person. I mean, he took back roads, so like no paying attention to the solid lines or no passing zones, just zip, zip, zip. But there weren't a lot of cars on the road at that hour. And then coming home that early evening, there were cars. We went a different way, and he was just a hellacious tailgater, just a pain in the ass tailgater, which I cannot stand. Just a bully, but I never felt unsafe, I'll tell you that. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, so I spent this whole day, and he understood I was there. It was Liz from the Charlotte Observer was going to shadow him. Mm-hmm. And so, I just had my notepad, and I didn't ask him a ton of questions. I was like writing in my notebook, like what he said, all this, that, and the other. And then I realized it was really getting on his nerves. And at one point he's like, aren't you going to ask me anything? And I'm like, well, yeah. I said, but right now I'm just learning by watching you. I figured I'd learn more by just listening and watching. And he's like, I think he liked that. And I'm sorry, this is a muddled memory, but there were moments where he'd like provoke, kind of ask kind of challenging questions, and just I could tell he was testing me. Is what he was doing. He was just trying to see what did I have a spine, or who was I? I wasn't his normal reporter. Mm-hmm. I didn't seem to shrink from him, but could he kind of back me down? And I wasn't really doing anything confrontational. And I just would sass him back. I mean, he'd sass me, I'd sass him back, and
he liked that.
He liked that. It was totally like that. And some memories are personal that I won't share. But just over the years, he was super helpful and super kind. And I know that's because I didn't treat him like the Intimidator. I asked him normal things. I asked him about his dad. I asked him about just things that weren't strictly about turning left, or being a badass. That didn't play into the stereotype. Because the truth is, he was an incredibly loyal, caring, sensitive person. And a deep thinker. I mean, he dropped out of school in the 9th grade, something he regretted for the rest of his life. And we talked about that a good bit. But super smart. I mean, one of the smartest people I've ever come to know, along with Junior Johnson, who also didn't finish traditional schooling. But, if he trusted you, he trusted you, and it was good to get to that point. And I think if I had just treated him like this two-dimensional cardboard figure that he made millions off of, I'm the Intimidator, I'm the badass.
Right.
It wouldn't have got beyond a two-dimensional understanding of him.
You treated him like a person, not a persona.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I expected to be treated too, like a professional. But I guess I'm not saying anything unique, but he was it.
Actually, you are. I mean, because most people only know Earnhardt as the persona, as the Intimidator.
Well, that's all he wanted.
Number 3.
That's all he wanted people to know about him. That's all he wanted his rivals to know about him. And that was the mirrored sunglasses, the pain in the ass. This is how I drive. He'd sit in his car about like this, and
hunched way down.
Actually, that irritated him because. So when we spent the day at North Wilkesboro, to get from one part of the track to the other, I think we took a golf cart. I know we took a golf cart. And so he drove, and we got in it. And so I went like that. And I'm like, he's like, why are you sitting that way? And I'm like, you sit that way. And I wanted to see what's the big whoop? Like, why are you doing that?
Right.
And he's like, you sit up proud. You're riding with me, So, I just treated him like a normal person. And then again, I wasn't awed by him. I do think oddly, Earnhardt felt like an outsider. He was an outsider, super conscious again of not finishing high school. super devastated by the death of his father at a very young age. He had such a hard life, married, got a girlfriend pregnant, married as a teenager, worked in a gas station, worked in a cotton mill,
Right.
It just earned everything the hard way and hustled and did not grow up with a lot of kind of refined social graces. And then he was a multimillionaire and a corporate spokesperson. So he was a kind of acutely aware of ways in which he was in the mainstream. And I honestly think he identified with me as like, well, she doesn't fit in either. Like here's an outsider. She's making her way. She's earning her way. And I knew him over several years and observed him in different settings. And it 3 or 4 different papers. I would always find a way to write about him or reason to spend time with him. And he was incredibly caring to elderly people, incredibly gracious to older people, to
Really?
anyone with a disability, to little kids. Like the toughest demographic for him was, the classic NASCAR fan, that guys that would show up wearing his picture on their chest.
Right.
I think it was hard for him to understand. I don't know. I have a thought, but I'm not making sense of it. But he had a real goodness to him, but an affinity, I think, for people on the margins more so than in the mainstream.
That's interesting.
And I think it helped me that I was, in his view, on the margins, but it was not holding me back. I got my interviews. I busted my ass in the garage. I asked questions. I did not pretend to have knowledge I didn't.
Right.
I'm like, explain me a restrictor plate and show it to me. How does it work?
Well, Earnhardt didn't. He saw you for what you were. I think that's really interesting that you were able to develop this rapport and this relationship because he saw you as a bit on the margins, a woman coming into the world of sports writing and NASCAR and working your ass off and really doing the type of work that he respected. I think that's and again, I think the thing that stresses it's not friendship. It's totally different.
It's totally different, but he was very funny. It was early on in our relationship. I cannot remember for what reason, but we were in his hauler and the transporter truck and talking, and I mentioned to him that I was diabetic, that I had diabetes, and he honestly went like almost white as a sheet. He's like, "You have the sugar?" Which I don't know, you're not a Southerner, but that's a old-time euphemism for having diabetes. If you have the sugar, you have the sugar. And it was in the old school South, it was a stigma. It's like you had cancer,
Right.
and it was a fatal illness. And it was bad. And he's like, "You have the sugar?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And my parents are Southerners. I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "You have to give yourself shots?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like 7 times a day." He's like, "I could never do that. I could never give myself shots." And I'm like, "I could never race a race car 200 miles an hour." I said, "That's good." So,
Yeah, he didn't want anything to do with putting a needle in his arm, but
that was a level of bravery that blew his mind. And then he's like, then he became like totally Dale. He's like, "You don't need to be hanging out with those other reporters drinking." And I'm like, "Well, Dale, I don't do that." He's like, "Well, if you have the sugar, you can't be out drinking like those other reporters." I'm like, "Fear not."
He was like looking out for you.
Yeah, very dear.